I think the Big Ten SEC advisory committee was probably raised my eyebrows probably a little bit because I'm not surprised at the Dartmouth union thing. It also feels like with collective bargaining, it feels like everybody's been outside the stadium sort of dancing around this idea. Now everybody's sort of getting inside the stadium and they're kind of sort of getting closer to this idea. I don't know what to make of the Big Ten SEC thing because people people in positions of power like nothing more than meetings and committees that I'm not sure really do anything.
You
I
mean
it
you mean
seemed
bureaucrats being a bureaucracy with
yes.
red tape and all the other different colors of tape?
Yes, and now they seem to think they have some momentum to maybe reshape the sport. I don't know. It's interesting because Kevin Warren and Greg Sankey weren't on great terms. Now you have Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey who seem to be best buds. It seems pretty notable that the two most powerful conferences are working together. But like I said, it's a meeting, it's a committee, it has no power. I don't all of this I don't really know what to make of it yet.
Well, let's start there then, because I think the power is ultimately the most important question I think you should ask about this particular story this week in college football is is this the beginning of the two conferences creating their own entity, their own sport, their own league? Ultimately, to me, the most important question for this is voting rights. Voting rights was a big issue with the college football playoff expansion. The first time it had to be unanimous. That is not the case any longer. We don't even know what the television contract is going to look like, or the format could change in theory after 2024. We have 2025. We have 2 years of this. To me, this is about voting rights and control over the rules that govern the Big Ten and the SEC. And if they believe that they are playing a different game than other teams, which I would say they are playing a different sport than a lot of college football teams, but the ACC and the Big 12 are not that far behind. They're not that different from those two. Is Eastern Michigan playing a different sport than Michigan? Is Louisiana Tech playing a different sport than LSU? Absolutely. That is the case. And the SEC, of course, and the Big Ten financially are on a different plateau. So to me, the question is this the beginning of these two conferences taking control of the rules? And it's about voting authority. If they have the rules to change the portal, which I've said on this show, and I've told you, Stephen, I think the first thing that the SEC is going to try to fix, and I imagine this is now in conjunction with the Big Ten, is to fix the portal rules because they don't need Congress, they don't need state laws, they don't need any of that stuff like they do with NIL. There's no antitrust, lawsuits right now about the portal that I think I know of. But I think they're going to try to fix the portal and maybe move signing day and come to some agreements on what those look like for the sport. So to me, that's what this is. It feels like the two leagues saying, look, we need to make our own rules. And I don't know, is that the right question? Like is this move the beginning of a new authority over a particular um, group of football teams?
Potentially. A couple things that I found interesting while we were, discussing this before we recorded. Greg Sankey, I think, was on the transformation committee for the NCAA, and I think there were high hopes that there was some sort of reforms going to come out of it. I don't really think anything major came out of it. So I think he has been a believer that you have to work under the NCAA structure. So I don't know that's necessarily about some sort of breakaway. I think it's more about what you said, and that is control. It's control about some of the scheduling, the rules, the transfers, signing day, whatever NIL. If nothing else, I think it's an attempt to push the ball forward a little bit and sort of take control of kind of where this is going. The S word was mentioned in a Pete Thamel story on ESPN, which was the settlement word when it comes to some of these cases. So basically, this would chart a new path forward, maybe allowing some of the conferences to settle some of those lawsuits, and then those conferences take the lead on how the new structure of college football is set up. And the SEC and the Big Ten would be at the forefront of that because it does seem like there is some frustration about control, process, and pace at these things. The Power Five schools already have a little bit more autonomy than some of the other schools, but maybe this is just further solidifying it to some extent. So I think if we get a new sort of structure out of this where they can settle some of these things and chart a new path forward, I think that's probably a win for college football. I think the question is, to your point, the ACC and Big 12 aren't that far behind. So there is a power two, and then we have the ACC, Big 12. Then we have the next group of college football. Where does Notre Dame fit into some of this discussion as well? There's a lot of questions about this, but I think you can also start to see what maybe the attempt is, if they can sort of end some of this chaos and bring some structure to some of these things.
So Big Ten, SEC, long been the most financially stable, and clearly we're heading towards a power two structure in the sport at some point. Now who's in that group? I don't think we know that yet. Again, one of the most important questions is who is above the line. Some of that will be dictated by television and what television wants to buy, pay for, and then sell. The question is around, like, again, what are the questions we should be asking? Oh, by the way, unprecedented ESPN, Fox, and Turner now getting together on a direct-to-consumer live sports streaming service. What does the Big Ten and the SEC have in common? They have ESPN and Fox. Now, the Big Ten also has NBC and CBS. It does not feel like that NBC and Paramount or NBC and CBS are going to be a part of this direct-to-consumer project. They want to keep their live sports bundled in their sort of linear package. Again, now you got to be like a media executive to talk about college football. It's just, but again, you see who's included in this direct-to-consumer rights. It is the network that covers most of the SEC games. It is the network that covers most of the best Big Ten games, owns the Big Ten network, SEC network, and who is negotiating for combined. Oh, by the way, True TV and Turner and TNT, they have the tournament. Oh, by the way,
right.
And let's think through this. Who is bidding on the TV rights for the college football playoff? It is probably ESPN, but ESPN plus Fox plus Warner can probably share the cost of that and maybe put a bigger bid forward to outdo, maybe, I don't know, hypothetically, some Silicon Valley companies that might want to get involved. So NBC, we've seen, has already been involved in streaming a game on Peacock. We know that Amazon is streaming on Thursday nights. So this part of it is absolutely cable saying to college football fans and to all the other sports on those platforms, which is the NBA, the NHL, a bunch of other stuff, but is saying, look, we want to put you all in one place, and then we need to work together to pay for the rights. And this is the Big Ten SEC advisory group coming together at the same time that we hear about an ESPN Fox launch. I don't think that's an accident.
Yeah, I was going to say the timing of that announcement yesterday was very curious, considering what happened at the end of last week. I don't know whether they're related or not, but it makes you wonder. Don't get me started on the Peacock
SEC
NFL thing,
Big Ten fans unified together.
Right. Yeah.
Finally. Disney Disney and News Corp united together.
Right. Strange bedfellows, I guess, is to make progress here. Really, I mean, if you are a sports fan, you're just missing a few things there. I think what NBC, like you mentioned, and CBS would be the only two I think that's not on there. So it's interesting, and it's also, I think, when you look at the college football playoff right before the national championship kicked off, there was a report on ESPN that ESPN was likely to get the rights for like the next 8 years, counting 2024, 2025, and then the next after that. However, there was a little tidbit about sub-licensing games. Fox wants in.
Yep.
Other entities went in. So you can kind of see, I think, where this is going.
Just watch an NFL playoff weekend. You have 4 games, and they're on 4 different channels. Like, that's how you maximize revenue and get all your TV partners something to sell. So, again, I think this is about building the framework of the sport in the future, controlling the rules. Like you said, the Big Ten and the SEC need to have similar scheduling models, I think. I think the SEC needs to get on board with the Big Ten's model. I've long said 3 and 6 is what they need to do. I think the Big Ten is sort of dancing around it, but they need to go 3 and 6 as well. So what better way to do that than to have an advisory group where they come together and make a decision together? How about portal rules? How about transfer rules? How about signing day rules? How about NIL rules? How about bowl structure? How about, I mean, it just, I don't know how this is not about them deciding their own rules. And I don't think it's a coincidence. It happens at the exact same time that we find out that ESPN and Fox and Warner are now all going to work together to deliver those sports directly to your computer screens / television / phones.
Do you
So.
feel like the pace of potential changes, big changes, has sped up a lot? And I asked that question because if you would have asked me last summer, I would have said it's probably a couple years away. I'm not so sure that's the case anymore. I
Yeah.
think the last 6 or 7 months have spurred a lot of, I don't know, I don't want to say momentum. I want to say a little bit of speed or a little bit of urgency maybe to resolve these issues. Do you
Wait.
agree with that?
Yeah, yes, I do. And I would change my sort of, I think the whole sport changes in 2030 or 2031 or 2032. I would just change that to, I guarantee that the entire sport will be changed by 2030.
Yeah.
Like that's sort of how I feel. Um, and I don't even think the Big Ten SEC thing is like the biggest story in all of this, but they are all working together.
Should
The unionization, the employee status, the private equity, the coaches leaving, NIL, the NCAA investigation, lawsuits in court, and the Big Ten and SEC sort of like, why do they have to publicly say that they're doing any of this? Why couldn't Petiti and Sankey just have conversations, informal conversations about any of this stuff? So like it feels like all of these things, these forces are all working in one direction. And honestly, court cases are what is pushing all of this, I think. Public sentiment is like, we don't care that athletes are getting paid. In fact, we're in support of it now. So I think there's just I, I think you're right. It is in the sport's best interest to get this period of chaos out of the way as quickly as possible. Now, that does that mean that we land in a place where we all love and recognize the sport? Maybe not. Does it mean we land in a place where we have two different sports that we can love equally? Like a sport that we recognize as old college football, where we watch group of 5 teams play and Big 12 teams play and ACC teams play in like another championship tournament? Maybe. We've talked about that. I'm all in on that. I'd love to watch that. I'm totally down. Doesn't mean I'm also not going to enjoy Alabama, Ohio State in the playoff. Like I'm going to enjoy. I can enjoy both of them. Um, I it's I agree. I think your point is valid. It's all happening much faster than even we expected. I do not think, however, that the Big Ten SEC advisory group is the biggest piece that could, I think almost all of this stuff could be for the betterment of the sport in theory. There is one part of this that I think would be the worst thing that could happen to the sport. I want you to guess.
Well, I wanted to go back for a second.
Okay.
I think there is some urgency to resolve this because there is that looming case. Like, I think it's House versus NCAA. I think spring 2025. And I think that's the one that Jeffrey Kessler's involved in. And generally, that's not a good thing if you're on the other side. And so I think there is some urgency to resolve that. But also, it feels like all these issues are sort of in a vacuum. They're their own big picture issue, but they're all connected in some way. And they're all connected in back to the root cause of this, which is just years of not keeping up with public opinion and perception, and also trying to bring some structure to the chaos. You mentioned the public. I think as long as the games are exciting and all that other stuff, I think there are the hardcore fans that are concerned about the day-to-day chaos and all the roster stuff. And maybe there are some that are turning away from the sport a little bit, but still look at the ratings during the season for the college football playoff. The fans aren't leaving in mass. I think fans I don't think care as much about the pay for play stuff, maybe as they did 10 years ago.
Not even
it's
close.
Really just about the product on the field has been great. And as long as it continues to be great, it's not going to be a factor.
Yeah. The Big Ten SEC thing is a logical step that I think many people could have predicted. Is it ahead of time? Is it a little maybe more loosely organized than we expected? I mean, again, it's just sort of like the first step in what could be the step. It strikes me as the beginnings of the breakaway, or whatever that's termed. Now, again, we're going to get into this. because all these other stories are a factor here too. But I do think that this is about voting rights and control of the rules. And if the Big Ten and SEC are joining forces now publicly, that I think that should tell you exactly where we're headed with this whole thing.